In this video, we're going to go behind the scenes on the visual effects breakdown of Iron Man. This is part 2 in the 5-part series. We're covering the first flight and R&D leading up to that. Throughout this video, we're going to dig deep into deconstructing the visual effects process for the film from the unique perspective of a visual effects supervisor. We'll discuss the work involved, the techniques, the technology, the process, all the key sequences of the film, and how all of them were created. I'm Allan McKay, I'm a visual effects supervisor in Hollywood. I've been working in the industry for 25 years at studios like Industrial Light and Magic and dozens of other leading visual effects studios. On projects like Game of Thrones, Transformers, Star Trek, Superman, Avengers Endgame, my goal is to teach artists and creators the skills and knowledge to build a successful career in the creative industry, as well as the business side of being an artist. This is part 1 of a 5-part video series. Each day this week I'll be reviewing a new sequence from the movie, as well as a compilation of the effects at the end of the week. The goal is simply to break down and explain the shots and the challenges for each of these sequences, and share my thoughts as a visual effects supervisor on how I would approach a lot of these. Typically we're handed the script, and we got to break down exactly what we need to do and allocate the right studios and the right people to each of these sequences. So this is an opportunity for me to be able to break down my thoughts on how I would approach a lot of these sequences and also discuss a lot of what's involved in the creative process. Finally, all the content that I have on this channel I make for free, and all I ask in return is if you could please subscribe and like this video. It won't mean much to you, but it will mean the world to me, and you won't miss out on any of the upcoming content that I'll be releasing daily. Finally, if there's a particular movie that you want to see covered in the upcoming visual effects breakdowns, let me know, leave a comment below, as well as any questions that maybe weren't covered here. I'm happy to answer those as well. So, let's get started. Going through like this area here, I don't think there's anything really CG. Obviously, you know, you've got a lot post-processed. It's mainly just when we get to here. I believe ILM did all this stuff. And I have a feeling back then ILM was still somewhat using particle cards for a lot of stuff, so it wasn't even volumetrics. So either way, you just got this, you know, whether it's blobs or whether it's literally just cards, like 2D pictures of smoke, but it works, does what it needs to do. You got 3D reflection and lighting on the ground, things like that, and then you have some light particles shooting up, you know, off here, and lights underneath, which would be 3D, just to make it feel like it's propulsion. Obviously, that's a digi-double. Shoot them up against the wall. So that's really the gag, is to have a 3D version of him that looks realistic enough, and having some sparks, stuff like that, kind of fall down. I'd assume that that's all 3D particles. Looks good. I mean, pretty simple stuff, but these are sorts of things that it's not a big visual effects shot. That's not the focus here. But like I said, I'm just going to go through these kind of quickly. These are all screen burn-ins. I guess these days with LCDs, we don't have to worry about it too much, but like with CRT monitors back in the day, you would see these would be green and they have a tracking marker on it. A lot of the time you'll still have these. Like before, it would need to be green and comped in because it's strobes. Like you'd see these lines just flicker through the whole time. Whereas now it comes down to whether or not there was intent behind all this, like whether or not they'd actually gone and made all the on-screen display graphics for all the stuff before they actually did it, or when they got into post, that's when they started thinking, okay, well, we should go and design all the stuff up. And usually that's the case, is that all of this stuff, like there's a Photoshop histogram there, you know, stuff like that, but all of this stuff here is stuff that you know, is probably done after the fact. So that means that it would be a green screen, it needs to be tracked, and then they can put the graphics in afterwards. Now, what's interesting about this movie in particular is a lot of the HUD stuff, a lot of the hologram stuff that they're doing. I don't think there's... Okay, yeah, there is some stuff in here. So again, I'm just going to go through it really quick, but obviously it's just all 3D, You render out a wireframe with fall-offs, you add some glows, things like that to it. You do 3D tracking for the arm, so that way it follows. All this stuff looks really good. And the interesting thing is, I'm not sure, I apologize, I'm moving around a lot, but let's say in some scenes you'll see him interacting with a lot of this stuff. And for him to give a proper performance, I feel like this was one of the first movies that, this and Minority Report, where it became a specialized thing where you would go and you would design and have a visual effects supervisor on set specifically for this stuff. So obviously you have your main VFX soup on the client side, but then whoever the vendor is doing all these design elements, typically a motion graphics studio back then, primarily they'd be in New York, they would actually design like very crude cardboard things for all this stuff. So that way you would have some dials, and you might have like a lever, you know, that moves up and down. Things like that, that the talent, in other words, Robbie Downey Jr., can actually go and interact with. And so that way they can move the dial and they can interact with it. They know what they're touching. And it's really important because that way they've got a better understanding to what they're going to be doing. And that way they're not just like moving their hands around and then you've got to try and get something sensical out of all of that. So this definitely was one of those movies that really pushed and popularized this type of way of doing things, where suddenly, I'm just going to jump through, see if there's any more of this development stuff in here. I mean, then there's all the HUD stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but that was kind of interesting. It's all done in Nuke, primarily the Orphanage, and I think also PLF, Pixel Liberation Front, had some stuff to do with it. PLF is typically more previs. Yeah, I apologize, I'm just kind of screwing around here, but yeah, I mean, that's the main thing though, is just doing this sort of stuff. There's a lot more emphasis on it later on, like to do it right, because the more this stuff actually looked intelligent and more thought went into it before they actually shot it all, the more that the talent then could actually interact and do it all on purpose and get some really interesting stuff out of it. So again, I think one of the key things here is subtlety. There's some really basic effects elements. I feel like the sparks play a really important role here, just to kind of get everything tied in and interacting. So it just doesn't feel like, okay, you've got this kind of steamy stuff everywhere. There's some kind of interaction, especially when it's meant to be fire, stuff like that. Now, like I said, I'm just going to go through this pretty quick. I thought it was also interesting getting to see a bit more of his man cave, just from different angles and things that you might have picked up on before. There's stuff like this that's subtle, but those are like going to be 3D sims of paper, things like that, just things to help interact everywhere. I feel like a lot of this stuff is comp elements, and that's why in some cases you know this stuff is moving very quickly, but there's not really much motion blur, which looks kind of odd. Little stuff like that. But I kind of like it. I like that stuff back then because it kind of gives it some charm, whereas now this stuff would be a little... I kind of liked that though. It kind of gave it a bit of charm, like the imperfections that you would get from just having cards of stuff that didn't really work. Just kind of slapped it all on and it kind of worked. It kind of just did the job, you know. It's just like stuff like this where the sparks just die out of nowhere, like they're not cooling down or anything. They just kind of disappear because, you know, it either hit the frame of the card or whatever it might be. And then this was all wire work. I think it was 0G did the wire work for this. So then you got stuff like this. This is all 3D. And I've actually had the visual effects supervisor for ILM. They did most of the photoreal work, right? And so that was the big challenge, is trying to make this not look CG. Like, okay, there's the CG puppet. So it was a mixture of initially doing all the practical suit on him and then having some bits that need to animate that would be 3D, so that we could get the mechanical animation out of it, but the rest of the time it would be more of a suit that was all mechanical, and Stan Winston Studio did all that stuff. So if you go to allanmckay.com/101, I've actually got an interview with the visual effects supervisor at ILM for Iron Man 101, so 101. Okay, if you go there, you'll be able to listen to the whole interview. But we're chatting about this because I thought it was kind of interesting. Like, I was at ILM during Iron Man 2, and but Iron Man 1 Like I said, I was in New York during that time. And what was interesting though is like Favreau was not a big fan of CG, and so there's a lot of comments he was making about the suit, just like, it doesn't look real, doesn't look real. But it got to a point where he's commenting on parts of the suit, like, this, this here or something doesn't look right. It looks fake to me. And he's actually commenting on the real suit. So that's where I feel like that's where they got their confidence, like, okay, we've done a good job, because at this point the director can't tell the difference between the real suit that was shot in frame and the CG version, which obviously is augmented on. So at that point, it kind of gave them free reign. They could strip away a lot of this. I think he was saying to Ben Snow, like Robert Downey Jr. was saying to Ben Snow, like, I love you, because at that point, whenever they were filming this stuff, they were just like, you know what, just wear a tracking suit, in other words, spandex, with some tracking markers on it, and don't worry about having to, wear the suit anymore. Instead, what we'll do is we'll go and add all the 3D suit on top of you. So at that point, like, for the rest of the movies, there wasn't this practical suit. It was actually all CG moving forward. So that was like a huge win for everybody in a lot of ways, because it was really stiff and uncomfortable to wear. Interestingly, though, in Iron Man 3, I was chatting with Scanline, and that was like the reoccurring theme was that Robbie Downey Jr. has this giant ass, because they're having to get the bits of the suit while his house is being demolished, and have all the bits flying in from all over the place, and match move and land on his body and fit to it. And they were finding that the proportions of his body were just really out of place. Like, he had a big butt and big legs, so it was really difficult to actually get the suit to accommodate his body properly, just because of that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Whereas in a suit, it would be forced into the suit, so it would all work. But ILM did a lot of development on getting really realistic metal shaders. They basically said, okay, for this, we're going to go back and revisit everything and try and figure out, like, how to do everything a lot more realistic. And they did a great job. Like, the stuff looks amazing. And especially for this being chrome. Like, if you remember Phantom Menace, that's slightly different, because that was 100, like, there was someone who spent like a year, I think, just researching and building a physically accurate chrome shader of what the chrome ship in Phantom Menace would look like. And it just looks wrong. And that's because in reality, and we'll get into this in a moment, in reality is, we're not used to seeing a completely chrome spaceship. So whereas something like this is definitely dulled down, and this is the most naked you're going to see him. Like, in terms of, this is 100% pristine and clean. I kind of wonder if I zoomed in whether it would still have some kind of dirt or something on it, because it needs it just to kind of sell the realism. So there's all the HUD stuff, which it's kind of interesting, because I've never really looked at this stuff, but I know that the more that you look at it, you'll see how much work has gone into this. So I guess depending on which way he's facing, yeah. Actually, no, that's correct. I guess he's facing, which direction would that be? North? No, it would be, yeah. So there's Santa Monica, so yeah, this is kind of wrong. This is LAX. Sorry, I'm nerding out about geography, because I lived in Santa Monica most of my life. So but I love, like, you got the flight patterns, like all this stuff. It's really impressive, just all the things that come up. So again, this is where you're gonna see all the sparks, everything else to kind of just sell the shot. And there is little subtle things like you usually wouldn't pick up on, but as he's coming through, you see like error detection here. So it's kind of flashing, like, warning you're going to hit the side. And then you see him actually hit the side there and fly off. So it's such a subtle thing, but there's a lot of thought that went into these that's really well done. So this is him flying out from Point Doom, up in the air. And again, like, all this sort of stuff here is just CG him, particle system. There's no lights around. I mean, Malibu is really quiet. Like, there's really not that much there. And so there's Santa Monica. That's my hood. This is the Santa Monica Pier. Took my wife on one of our first dates on this thing here. And then he switches over. This is clearly Wilshire. He's heading out to Hollywood. Goes up in the air. So I just figured I'll mention this really quick. So again, like, this is just same thing. There's not really any light. You might get some moonlight or something, but the way that this is lit is pretty smart. You've got light source here, and you got light sources here, and that's important because you want to be able to identify his face as well as, you know, his chest is obviously like a very pivotal part to his whole origin story. The backlighting is kind of ridiculous, but he is chrome, I guess. But anyway, like the lighting, is very dark. All the lighting is from behind, because you would imagine that the only light source, really, unless you talk about the moon, is going to be all the lights on the ground in Santa Monica or Hollywood, wherever he is at this point. And as you get closer, though, you can see that he's meant to be frosting up. So this is just a layered shader on top, so you're taking away a lot of the reflectivity to kind of fog it up in a way. And yeah, I mean, you're essentially just building out the shader to make it feel like ice is building up. The problem is with ice is that when there's no lighting around, especially a CG version of it, it's just not really going to look that interesting. So these kind of look very muddy and not that interesting overall, especially now that you've taken away the light sources to indicate that he's kind of powered off. It's like, well, somehow he's kind of better lit than he was before, but it's kind of necessary. But yeah, it's just about like there's a layer of stuff that you're just like fragmenting, breaking off, and then that sunset there. So he's in Hollywood. And so doing shots like this, I mean, some of these you're just going to go out in a helicopter and shoot them, or you're going to go up to, let's say, Griffith Observatory or somewhere like that and just get some panoramic shots. But ultimately what you want to do is just create a big sky dome, like a 360 sky dome, which like a panoramic basically, that then you have full rain here to shoot these sorts of shots. It's kind of nice, there's this subtle heat distortion here, as well as smoke. I don't think you really have a heat distortion at this point, but there is one for some reason. You know, but this sort of thing is pretty, like, I would assume a lot of these shots are entirely CG at this point, just because it's easier. But there, like I said, there might be a couple where it's like, okay, we'll just do a small whip pan over here or whatever, and then these are obviously all real. And like I said, the shots of like a lot of this stuff here, you're just gonna have a CG house for a lot of it all. Going through this stuff frame by frame, that was kind of interesting, because you know, there isn't that much work that goes into this. It's basically cut a hole in the ground, create some spark elements and stuff like that. Finally, there's a light source once he's punched a hole in the ground. But something like this isn't that difficult. This is an interior shot, either of a real house or just a soundstage, and then this here is just a simple comp in where you have like a 3D roof, and you're just throwing lots of crap through it in a digi double CG character. Then this is a very specific shot where they would drop like a giant cinder block or something onto the piano, and then all of this stuff here is 3D. So that sort of stuff isn't that difficult to do. Same thing here, giant cinder block or whatever it is they're going to drop onto the car to crush it. Is it Shelby Copra? Is that right? Yeah, it's a shame. So, you know, and then you'd have a lot of CG dust and things like that, which is all comped on. So you probably notice there's a lot of the same gags. Like obviously there's wood, glass, things like that that's thrown in here, but a lot of the dust, everything, sparks, it's all just the same stuff throughout the whole film. It's not anything revolutionary, it's kind of the same gags, even through different studios. So far I'm noticing that Orphanage is probably doing a lot more of the effects in terms of 3D effects, whereas I feel like Embassy, with the exception of the fire stuff, which I feel like was Scanline, but again, I want to kind of check that out. Obviously with ILM, it's more doing a photoreal Iron Man, but a lot of the effects elements I feel like are more comped in. Okay, so let's just talk about this scene here, because I love this scene. I still remember StarCraft 2, the teaser, totally got inspired by this. But you've got this here, which would all be shot. Like, it would all be shot on a soundstage. And what then happens is you would track the shot, and you would actually hand animate all these 3D bits moving around. And you'd use what's called projection mapping to get the texture from the footage and be able to map it onto all of this and move it around. And so then as it opens up, and you see like, holy crap, there's all this mechanical stuff under the ground. And what's interesting is like, that's all obviously CG. But that's how you would do it, is that this would be soundstage, and then that's all 3D. Looks really good. And I feel like a lot of time this sort of stuff is more of a situation basis, in terms of you've got him there and you're doing all this stuff on top. It's like, there's probably going to be stuff like this that you will never see on the suit, but it makes sense for a close-up shot. Like, okay, we need to have all the stuff kind of like linked together to get the front and back bits of the leg, of the calf, or whatever part of the body it is, and tie together. We'll screw it all in. But having all the underlying stuff, and I know that they did model a lot of underlying bits and pieces, but then there are going to be certain situations where it's like, we'll have that shoe for this shot, but then you'll never see it again. But it all makes sense at the time, just to kind of indicate like what's going on. Now, this I thought would be important to talk about, because this is the first time we're seeing the painted suit. It's brand new. He's never left the building. All this stuff happening. And I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. And I thought it'd just be good to talk about this. This is a brand new suit. It's never been worn. It's freshly painted. Yet there's dirt, there's scratch marks, there's all this stuff all over the place. And this is important to mention because I've talked about this before with Titanic, that back in the 90s when they were doing Titanic, they being Digital Domain, built a completely accurate version of the ship that is how it would look. And the thing is that it just didn't look right. It didn't look real. And that's because real life imperfections is what sells things. It's the same thing with Sony ImageWorks when they did Beowulf. You look at Anthony Hopkins, who plays the father in that movie, and you then look at Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie just looks completely unrealistic, and it's because she's flawless in that. And I think that was a call that she made, that she wanted to look flawless in it, from what I recall. And that was the thing, is like the imperfections is what makes it real. So Anthony Hopkins being like, I don't know, 80 or something in the movie, like he looks more realistic than anyone else in the film because of all those imperfections, the wrinkles, the sunspots, aging in general. Whereas when you take all that away, it just looks completely unrealistic, which was what was happening with Angelina Jolie. Same thing here, that if this was perfectly clean all over and pristine, it would probably look fake. And this was probably an evolution in the shots, that initial discussions, it came out how it should look, and it just didn't look right. I love all the brushed metal, things like that they did, but it's the smudges, it's the scratches, it's all the stuff here and here and here, like all the dust accumulating on the surfaces. There's paint scratched off in these areas here, more smudges here. All of this stuff is what makes it feel real. And you don't really pick up on it because it's not heavy, but it is there. And that's what really sells the shot. So, looking here, same thing, it's scratched all over the place. It's all those little things that not only help make it not look too boring and simple, but on top of that, the way the light's going to hit and react in those areas just looks a lot more real as well. It's a lot easier, like you can see all the dirt and scratches and things like that, all the mechanical stuff. You can get away with that a little bit more. Like you can see it early on, like these shots here, just in general, they don't need to look clean, and they work. They do what they need to do. But it's just more when you're looking at something like this, that it needs that stuff to really sell it. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll be back tomorrow with the next part in the series. Each week I plan to review a different film and share as many insights as I can with you. And if there's a particular movie that you want to see, leave a comment below and let me know. Or if there's any big questions not answered here that you would like to see covered, let me know as well. I'd love to hear from you. Finally, all the content that I have on this channel I make for free, and all I ask in return is if you could please subscribe and like this video. It won't mean much to you, but it will mean the world to me, and you won't miss out on any of the upcoming content that I'll be releasing daily. One last thing, I recently released a free course on how to raise your prices and land clients as an artist. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, both as an artist as well as a manager, hiring artists, managing them, and paying them as well. So I'm very familiar with this topic. For me, it's a pet peeve when people say there's no money in art, art's not a career, art doesn't pay. I want to eliminate the starving artist mindset for good. That's why I've created this 8-hour free course on everything I know about how to price yourself as an artist and how to raise your prices and land your dream clients that are willing to pay you what you're worth. It's completely free right now, so get the entire 8-hour free course at pricingclass.com or click the link in the description below and you can check it out there as well. And if you like this video, check out the video somewhere above me on all the other visual effects breakdowns like this one of your favorite visual effects movies that I've reviewed so far. I'm Allan McKay, thanks for watching.